Amen. Well, if you had a farm in the Free State, right? And if it was in particular a dairy farm, and maybe its name was Estina, and the Free State wasn't quite as free as it used to be, and somehow 220 million rand was allocated to that farm, and only 2 million has been spent. That's a 218 million rand deficit. Isn't it amazing how a balance sheet you could miss that? And how noticeable is that? Well, somewhere, somehow, someone decided that they would bend the rules to suit their own balance sheet rather than the balance sheet you and I are involved in, where we pay our taxes for this nation. And this reality of personal, social, political, and economic injustice, is it something new or something quite ancient? Are God's people exempt from this kind of injustice, or has it been part of the reality of our world since Adam and Eve? I mean, think of Adam and Eve. There they are. The snake says something, and they follow the snake, and the next thing is they find themselves excommunicated from a beautiful garden. I mean, how unfair is that? How unjust could that be? And then you got Cain and Abel. A brother kills a brother. Right early on in the Bible, this injustice. And then, of course, God's people enslaved by Egypt's Pharaoh. Just a change in leadership in Egypt and 300 years of slavery. I mean, how unfair is that? You're God's child. You're part of His creation, and you find yourselves enslaved for some 300 years. Well, in the first century, when the book of Revelation was read and written, we're right at the end of that first century, probably in the last 10 years of that first century when it was written. It was nothing different. Injustice was real. They were under Roman rule, which is modern-day Turkey. These 7 churches in that Asia Minor of the day, under oppressive Roman rule, sometimes very manipulative Roman rule, and sometimes very aggressive Roman rule. And the trade guilds in Rome, they would pressurize you. You were under the power of Rome, and they would pressurize you to either compromise your faith, to maybe become complacent, or, you had to have this new allegiance towards the Roman emperor. You had to bow your knee to Rome. And they lived under that reality. Well, Revelation 6. Now, we don't look at text in isolation here, so you've got to look at Revelation 6 and Revelation 7, just like Revelation 4 and Revelation 5 go together. Revelation 6 and Revelation 7 go. Are you ready, friends? Have you got your app on hand? Have you got your Bible on hand? I believe there's Wi-Fi here, so you could hook onto an app. Just get the code from M. She's probably got it. And but we'd love you to follow. It's not up on the screen because we'd love you to bring your Bibles to church or your app or whatever you got. So it's Revelation 6. So it's like this Poiki course, as we said. Revelation is lifting the lid on reality, on the real world, as it was happening then, as it's happening now. And it lifts the lid, Revelation 6, on injustice, on the injustices of this world that you and I live in. Now, if you're a parent, then you would go with me on this one, perhaps. I mean, your children from an early age, not young people like Jamie at all, but other young children would say, Mom and Dad, it's so unfair. What you've just done or what you've just said, or, it's so unfair. My teacher is just so unfair. Why have I got that teacher? Homework. Who invented homework? Why have I got to eat my veggies? Why is bedtime when it is? Why is playtime so short? As they grow up, those lectures, those lectures at varsity, why that lecturer? Why all this stuff? Our children, the older two have been working recently as they're sort of between jobs in the restaurant industry and one or two of the bars down front, earning an income for themselves. And they've been learning about breakages and spillages, right? Well, if you work there, then it's everyone's fault, whether you spilt it or you didn't break it or you didn't spill it. And you pay. Up front, they tell us, up front, you start with a deficit in your income. I mean, how unfair is that? And so as a parent, your children start at a young age, and you probably say to them at some stage, well, life is unfair, isn't it? At some stage, You probably say that to them. Life is, or somebody said it to you. Life is unfair. And so Revelation 6, some children, they're going to accept the unfairness of life. Some children are going to seek to take revenge on parents who are unfair. They plot and plan till you're old. They're going to send you to the old age home. And so the Lamb lifts the lid on injustice. Injustice, which God's people, and you know this by now, are not exempt from at all. And so Revelation, the Lamb lifts the 7 seals. These 7 seals that, it's the Lamb that's lifting the seals. So even though the injustice is there, we shouldn't fear. We came out of deep worship in 4 and 5. It's like chapters 4 and 5, you're taken up on the day of the Sabbath. It's the holy day. It's the Sunday. And then chapter 6 is like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's unjust, this world that I live in. That's what it's like. But Revelation looks that in the eye. Revelation doesn't skirt around it. And it's the Lamb that lifts the lid. So we shouldn't fear. And we shouldn't be, we're together with John and the Holy Spirit. It's like we're in a cosmic classroom in Revelation 6. The Lamb, Jesus, is our teacher. Friends, it would be wrong to oversimplify injustice. There's not one experience that is the same. And it's often this harsh reality of work and life in a world that is fallen. And so in Revelation 6, we're shown these crystal clear images of injustice. And John watches, and we watch, and we learn together. And look at Revelation 6, verse 1. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the seals. We're in this cosmic classroom. Friends, you should be on the edge of your seat as you look through Revelation with this graphic, beautiful language that is there. So, chapter 6 and verses 2 to 8, we've got these different horses. And oh my goodness, what different interpretations there have been on these horses. But it's the Lamb that begins to reveal. And there's this white horse, and he's holding a bow, and there's a crown on his head, and he's a conqueror, and he's bent on conquest. Friends, this is the injustice caused by external conflict. He's got a bow in his hand. Well, back in the day when Revelation was written, there were these Parthian mounted men. They were often on white horses, and they held their bows, and they conquered Rome. And there was this reality of this external threat. There's always been someone who wants to rule the world, right? If it's not your child in the home, then it's going to be Pharaoh. It's going to be Hitler. It's going to be North Korea. It's going to be, somebody's going to want to rule the world. And they're going to side on conflict to do that. And when people go to war, when political leaders decide, then the innocent suffer. There's injustice. It's the injustice of external conflict. You got that one, friends? The white horse got a bow, bent on conquest. There's a crown on his head. It's not the same white horse that comes later, who is faithful and true. And we recognize him as Jesus. This fiery red horse. Second, you're in Revelation 6, down verse 2, 3. We're just going down, and we're looking at some big pictures here. This fiery red horse, friends, has power in the text. Look at it in the text. Power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay one another. So this is the injustice caused by internal conflict, not external conflict. It's men slaying one another. You see Rome, like any kind of superpower that wants to rule the world, these little, these vassal states like Israel and others they had under their control. I mean, they're right around the Mediterranean. They're all the way around, and they've got this control. And if you want Rome's protection, if you want Rome's justice system, if you want Rome's work and prosperity, then it comes at a cost. And so the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, it was a false peace, wasn't it? I mean, you paid the toll. You paid your heavy, heavy taxes. And you paid homage to the emperors of Rome. And so as a Christian, living in the first century, you've got questions to ask yourself. Am I going to compromise my faith? The trade guilds, if you have a meal as you go out for a meal in business today. Well, in those days, food to the gods. You're going to have some of that to do business with Rome, the protection of Rome. And so this reality, the stirring of this fiery red horse. And so families would be divided. Well, I'm going to go or I'm not going to go. I'm going to compromise my faith or I'm not. And so the conflict came. The power to take peace. It doesn't just happen at a business level. Sometimes it happens at a very personal level in a home, doesn't it? When one family member decides to go one way and the others decide to go the other way. The power to take peace. You got the fiery red horse, friends. The people slay one another. And so the black horse, we're moving on. Well, the rider's got what in his hands? He's got a pair of scales. A pair of scales. This is the injustice of an economy that is out of balance. The injustice of an economy that is out of balance. A quart of wheat for a day's wages, verse 6. Minimum wages, starvation wages. While the rich and the famous flourish. Don't take away the wine and that stuff that's going on. Do you see it, friends? The discrepancy in a world where some are living extremely well and others can put nothing on the table. You with me, friends? We know this horse, don't we? This horse has been running around the world since Adam and Eve were excommunicated from the garden. And so this black horse. And so what does it? What's behind this? It's the greed of the powerful that exploit the poor. And they go to the market and they can't afford a thing. And everything is out of balance. But all is not hopeless. As you heard this morning, there are believers around the world who are reaching out to the poor. And the church is not dormant in these injustices. We're going to see that in chapter 7. Chapter 7's coming. As you look at chapter 6, you start saying, oh my goodness, everything sounds hopeless and desperate. But chapter 7 is coming. And it'll give us light on chapter 6. And of course, the pale horse looks like death and sickness. Well, death's going to get us all one day, isn't it? But often it seems like an injustice when the innocent die young, or the old are left on their own, or the old are exploited for their pension to keep 7 young people on the, food on the table, or there's terminal illness, or this pale horse actually wraps up all of the other horses. Everything that's happening through the injustice of the first 3 horses are expressed through the pale horse, because death and starvation and struggle happen as the first 3 horses run out around the world. And Hades follows this horse, doesn't it? Because for a lot of people around the world, life is a living hell, isn't it? As you look at famine, as you look at destruction, as you look at war, and the innocent dying, for some, they wake up in the day. Will they live? What will today look like? As you see scrawny little children growing up in refugee camps. They've been there 10 years. The pale horse around the world, friends. The reality of injustice. And hungry dogs and animals are in the text. This picture, it's kind of a bit of doom and gloom. But the Lamb reveals this picture to us. We're in verse 9 in chapter 6. And the Lamb opens the door, and the 5th seal opens, and an altar is before the Lamb, right up there. And who is right at, who is protected under the altar in your text? The souls of the martyrs. And so this seal is the injustice of religious persecution. The injustice of religious persecution that happened in Roman time. By the time, we're reading this text now, but already, by the latter part of the century, Antipas is dead, we know. Stephen and James have been killed in Jerusalem. Nero has brutally murdered believers in Rome. And then this question comes in the text. How long, O Lord, our sovereign holy God, how long will it be? And you are true and you are just. And when will this justice come to the inhabitants of the earth? And when will you avenge the blood of the martyrs, those who have died for their faith? And religious persecution is one of the saddest things, isn't it? I mean, it's just misdirected faith. And those who persecute others for their faith believe that they are right. Misdirected faith all around the globe. Christians have done it too, haven't they? Islam now, people dying. Militant Islam. The fifth seal opens up this place where the souls of the martyrs are kept safe. Not one has died without God knowing and seeing. And their souls below the altar. Protected by. But this question. And friends, sometimes people ask in the middle of injustice, where is God? Why isn't he intervening? Well, just this longing that you have. This longing that you have for a more just world. Where does that come from? The longing you have for a more just society. I'll tell you what, friends, it's Revelation 7 that's impinging on your heart. And you want to see justice. You want to see, wrongs righted. Lastly, and then we're going to go to Revelation 7. You still with me, friends? The sixth seal. The sixth seal, it's Jesus, the Lamb, who's opening the seals. And verses 12 to 14, as they, let me just see if I can read some of it for you. I watched as he opened the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. And the whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to the earth, as late figs dropped from the fig trees. When shaken by a strong wind, the sky receded like a scroll rolling up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. And friends, this is the injustice of the natural disasters that happen around the world all the time. Vesuvius in 79 AD, that volcano that had erupted and killed many. Perhaps that's part of John's reflections. And friends, God has created, the natural laws of nature. And the good and the bad, the believer and the unbeliever, we are subject to the laws of nature. So if you build your home on a fault line, or if you build your home in a floodplain, and if it's the rainy season or it's earthquake season, if you're a believer or an unbeliever, something's going to happen. And God will not change his natural law, which he's put in place. Gravity, right? Gravity, whatever. So this world that we live in needs tectonic plates. The scientists tell us tectonic plates, between the continents and the islands and so on, they're like the springs on your car. They absorb all the pressure. But the pressure gets too much sometimes, and there's an earthquake, or there's a tsunami. And God's natural law will have its course. And so you start to say to yourself, well, in all of that, is there hope? And so friends, in 15 to 17, and look at it carefully, 15 to 17, then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and every slave and every free man. In other words, everybody, from the rich to the powerful to the poor, are subject to these realities. And every slave, and they hid in caves among the rocks and the mountains. And they called to the mountains and the rock, fall on us and hide from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? And suddenly we're out of this cosmic classroom and we're into a cosmic courtroom. And the Lamb has also become the judge. And none of us are going to avoid that, are we? But who will stand in his presence? Who will be able to stand? Is it the elite? Is it the Romans? Is it the powerful? Who will be able to stand? The question is asked. And all of these injustices that you know about at a private level, or a public level, or a political level, they're also prophetic warnings. They are signs. And they're saying to us, his church, don't be complacent, friends. Don't compromise. Speaking to those first century Christians, speaking to us today. And so for the believer, this upcoming judgment is good news because we recognize the judge and he's the Lamb and we know him. But for the unbeliever, who will be your advocate before the throne? Will you have a lawyer? Will you be able to pay him or her? Because they charge a lot, don't they? Who will protect you in that time before the Lamb, before the throne? It's not too late now. That's why Revelation 7, it's as if judgment is suspended for a while. It's as if John is writing and pleading with the church to be strong in the midst of all these injustices because they're real. And he's calling on you and I. It's not too late. And verse 17, that question, look at it, friends. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? Who can stand in the presence of the Holy One? Is it all hopeless? Can we stand before a holy God? Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, right? Who can stand before a holy God? And of course, Revelation 7 tells us the answer. It's only the redeemed. This beautiful picture of those who are redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. And look at those who are marked. Revelation 7 verse 3. Put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. Put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. You who follow the way of the Lamb. You who follow him in a broken world, the way of the Lamb. Put a seal on their foreheads. And the 144,000, hasn't there been something said about that? Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses, are they right or are they wrong, friends? The JWs, the 144,000. Are they right or are they wrong? Because according to them, they are working to get in there. Because the 144,000, hy sal klaar vol. And you got to hope that somehow you're going to squeeze in by visiting those homes with your jacket and your tie and your Jehovah's Witness Bible, which, by the way, is not the same as the one that you have. It's been changed to suit their theology. But it's not only the Jehovah's Witness, it's us, the church, it's for all of us. And so this 144,000 is just a symbol of the whole. The 144, the 12 tribes back in the day. The 12 apostles, you can times them out. It gives you a lovely complete number. No one's missing. Everyone who has the seal of the blood of the Lamb on their forehead. In other words, you've given your life to Christ. You're living in right relationship with God. We sang about this justice is given to us as a gift, and we receive it. And so we can stand before the blood of the Lamb and the King of Kings. In Revelation 7 verse 9, after this I saw before me, he hears the 144,000. He hears them and he sees the great multitude. The 144,000 are just a representative of the whole, friends. They're just saying that heaven is full of people. Look at it. He can't even count. The multitude is so big. No one can count them. And friends, where are they standing in your text? Where are they standing? They're standing before the throne. And friends, what are they wearing? They're wearing white robes. And who's on the throne? It's the Lamb. And are they fearful? Are they anxious? What's their emotional state like? Because of all this injustice. No, they're trusting the Lamb. They're trusting the Lamb to lead them through all this injustice. They've learnt about breakages and shortages. They've learnt about parents who discipline and raise their children well. They know all about politicians that are going to try and take stuff. That's not going to change. Well, it might for a season, but politicians are politicians. Leaders can be corrupted. And so in the middle of all of that, friends, this beautiful calling, these promises begin to emerge in Revelation 7. And what's their response to all this injustice? What are they doing? What are they doing? This great multitude. What are they doing? They're singing. They are singing in the presence of the Holy One, in the middle of all this injustice, in the struggle where if they turned their face away from Rome, if they said, I will have nothing to do with your trade guilds, I will trust my God for food on my table, my land will produce enough for me and my family, I will not compromise my faith. And some of them laid down their lives for this, friends. And no matter, because of that, they were singing. And they were singing these beautiful songs. Can you see them there in your text? Revelation 7, verse 10. And they cried out in a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne. It's not Caesar. It's not Vespasian. It's not Jacob Zuma. Neither is it Cyril Ramaphosa. It's just Jesus, friends. Go down to verse 12. And amen, praise and glory, wisdom and thanks and honor and power and strength be to our God. And so you say to yourself, well, in the middle of all this injustice, in the middle of all this struggle, what does the church do? How do you and I live? Well, the just shall live by faith. The just shall live by faith. And so every small thing you do towards justice. You know, I walk on a particular little stretch of the beach, and sometimes that beach is dirty. It's got plastic bottles and broken glass in it, and I have a choice when I walk on that beach. I can walk past it or I can pick it up, right? I can do my little bit on my little piece of beach, right? And that's what God's people have always done. In the face of huge injustice, families have lived by faith. Individuals have gone to the workplace where there's injustice and temptation. And let's do it this way. And you say, no, I'm going to do it this way. Because there's a lamb whom I'm accountable to. And the way of the lamb is the one that I will follow. Could you say amen, friends? Is this how we're called to live? And we're called to sing while we do it, friends. These in Revelation 7 ain't complaining. They aren't saying the economy's going down the tube. They're not complaining about the State of the Nation address, whoever's going to give it, in the next few days. They're not worried about that. They're focused on the Lamb and the way of the Lamb in the middle of injustice. And look what they're doing, friends. Look what they do. These beautiful promises that come in the latter part of Revelation. Look at them. Who are they? The question is asked. And they're the ones who have come to the great tribulation. Well, when you've got your eyes on the Lamb, you can go through any tribulation, friends, however you want to interpret that text. And their robes are washed in white. But for us to stand before the Lamb, what happened to the Lamb? What happened to Jesus? For us to make it through the injustice of the world, to be accepted and received in the throne room of grace for eternity. What happened to the Lamb? For us to get a white robe. His was covered in blood, wasn't it? His was covered in blood. For us to be justified, he was treated with injustice. He was slain on the cross, friends, for you and I. And the text goes on to talk about, there will be no more weeping there. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Look at it. It's magnificent, the latter part of Revelation 6. They will never hunger. They will never thirst. The sun beating down on them. The scorching heat won't get to them. But Jesus was exposed to all of that, wasn't he? For you and I to receive his justice, to stand before him. He was on an unjust cross. His body was broken for you and I. Friends, do you see the picture? How will you live? Revelation 6, this injustice, how will you live? Well, the Lamb is offered to us in Revelation 7. A worshiping people. Is that enough for you, friends? That we will be with him for eternity. And so now, what do believers do? They reach out to those who are crying, those who are weeping, those little children who don't have a school to go to, the struggling neighbor, the struggling friend. You bring them to Alpha. Because you say that meal is just a taste of what it's going to be like in heaven. And you say, I love that tough neighbor of mine enough who likes to, do whatever or say whatever. I love him or her enough to invite them. That's what believers do in the middle of all the injustice. And so, friends, for us, to be with God forever. And don't miss this last little part, the seventh seal. Don't miss this, friends. The seventh seal in chapter 8. When he opened the seventh seal, there was what in heaven? There was silence in heaven for about a half hour. To be still and know that he is God. I mean, isn't it interesting, friends, as we start closing this down and we start thinking about our lives. And God's people coming out of an unjust system with Pharaoh. Pharaoh who persecuted them for 300 years, right? A change in leadership. The other Pharaoh was for them, and then suddenly there's one against them. For 300 years, they're slaves. They get set free. You remember the plagues? God does all these, and finally they're set free. They're on the way to the promised land, just like you and I. On the way to the promised land. We used to sing that song. Do you remember it? They're on the way to the promised land. And then suddenly the Pharaoh changes his mind again. And he says, we need those guys back here. We need them to work for us again. Bring hulle terug. And so he sends the army out, a massive army. You remember the story, friend. They're on the Red Sea. The sea is there, and Pharaoh's army is approaching. And they're squashed in the middle like you feel right now. In the reality of your world, they're squashed in. There's injustice. There's a massive sea over here. We can't get through it. And these guys are coming to attack. They set us free. They changed their minds, and they're coming to attack us. And there's old Moses. Don't you love Moses? Moses is the man on the moment, God's man of the hour. Moses, what have you got in your hand? Well, not much. I've got my staff. Well, reach out. And the sea parted. But the problem is still the enemy. The enemy is right there. And what's the word to them that comes through Moses? These Egyptians that you see, they will disappear. Be still and know that I am God. That's all God says. All you have to do is be still and know that I am God. And he takes care of them, doesn't he? Is that good news, friends? In the middle of your world of injustice, in the sadness and the brokenness of your reality, personal or public. Maybe your injustice was, it ended up in the divorce courts. Your injustice was that you lost your job, or it feels like you got news about your body and it just seems like so unfair. Let's worship together, friends, as we consider the reality of the way of the Lamb.